Hi, everyone. Good afternoon. My name is Adrian Kwong, and I'm a lawyer who gets to practice games and entertainment law at Consequia. And I'm going to be a moderator today for the session as titled Reality Bytes, Emerging Legal Issues at the Intersection of Real and Virtual Worlds Using Video Games and Esports as a Microcosm. That is a 21-word title and the longest title in the TLF brochure, right? So why couldn't we just have transforming the legal industry? So anyway, it's a huge topic and one that my panelists and I have a lot of things, we had to get through to think about what to say. But for today, I'm just gonna kind of talk about it as the red pill and blue pill topic, because if you see the blurb that was put up there, it's kind of put up as a choice between two things. And for context of you who haven't watched the 1999 movie, the YouTube link that I shared earlier, it basically, the star of the show, Keanu Reeves, who's called Neo, gets a choice, right? He can take a blue pill and wake up the next day and goes on with his life the way it always was, or he can take the red pill and follow Morpheus down the rabbit hole, so this Alice in Wonderland thing, and find out how deep the virtual world is that goes into it. So I'm not going to go into the movie, but essentially it's presented as a choice between, one or the other, a binary choice. So today, um, having looked at the topic, we don't aspire to be so life-changing, I think. Um, but what we are going to do today is try to take that build on the matrix analogy and look at the world of gaming. And I have a couple of panelists, which I'll introduce in a minute, and take what we've seen in the gaming world and some other associated worlds and what we could look forward to the metaverse, which is a topic you see a lot nowadays in the news and online. So we'll take a couple of questions through the chat box, which I've sent around the thing to put your questions in there. We'll go through the panel. We'll take some of those questions, and hopefully, you'll join us in this journey of wonder as we take a look into this really huge topic. All right. So just to kind of introduce the rest of the panel, I've got Eugene Marder, and he is the guy who is the senior in-house counsel at Twitch. In APAC, he leads Twitch's APAC team. Launched in 2011, Twitch is sort of a interactive live streaming service for content spanning gaming, entertainment, sports, PR, and more. In any given moment, more than 2.5 million people interact with Twitch's service. Before Twitch, Eugene worked at law firms in California and has experience in IP litigation, technology, and public policy. And that's the guy now who has his VR headset right on now with the cool lights. Eugene, hi. We have Wang, who's he's a VP legal at Razer, and we all have sort of Razer products, right? As you know, Razer makes gaming peripherals. He's based in Singapore, and he heads up the legal team at Razer that supports the Razer Gold credits, game credits, and payment systems. And he's the guy with the, I don't know what to put it, the Razer headset with the ears, right? And before Razer, he was general counsel at Singapore mobile streaming service Hook, and was an AGC at Singtel, where he worked in the group digital life unit. And before that, he was also in private practice. Okay, so Wang, and Wang's nursing a little bit of a cough, so forgive him if he needs to take a break here and there. Get well soon, Wang. And finally, to round out the panel, we have Professor Hak-Soo Ko, and he is from the Seoul National University in Korea, and he does research in data privacy, AI, and technology policy, as well as emerging issues relating to AI, ethics, and the metaverse. He's published a book recently, and he's practiced law in New York, Korea, and he holds various advisory positions for the Korean government as well as businesses. And Hak-Soo is an expert in a lot of things, and we're very fortunate to have these three experienced individuals with us today on our panel. Just as an admin note, of course, all of them here are speaking in their own note, on their own capacity, and not on behalf of their respective employers. And we've got the boilerplate out of the way. So, what I'm going to do now is maybe start with Wang. Maybe you could tell us a little bit about what the video game world is like and what it has to do with, what's the setup for the metaverse? What's the world of games like?
Thanks, Adrian. So this is This is going to be quite a big intro. I am also mindful that not all of the audience are gamers. So let me explain my approach. I will start with a series of questions that relate to game design philosophies. So they are game design questions that illustrate how games operate and the underlying game philosophies that will then set the stage for our metaverse discussion at a later stage of this talk. So let me first begin with these game design questions and how they affect the metaverse. So let's suppose you are going to start building or designing a game. There are some of these very important questions that first start. And now, when we talk about the metaverse, I think we have one or two very key assumptions to make as far as the platform is concerned. Firstly, a metaverse is definitely a massively multiplayer online experience, not unlike the MMO games that we have today, but I think it will be much more than that. That's one. Second, and in terms of platform, and we will talk later, I think it will largely at least have a mobile platform that supports it, because the user base and the penetration of the mobile handsets are by far greater than PCs or consoles. But of course, we're also going to have VR. AR discussions later on platform. Let me very quickly dive into the design questions, okay, design related questions. Now, first, for any MMO today, and likewise for the metaverse, I think the first question is whether a theme park, or a sandbox, theme park or sandbox. And this single first question determines many other related design questions. So just a quick illustration what a theme park is. Well, as you know, a theme park consists of roller coaster rides, laser tag, haunted house, merry-go-round. So the theme park is sectioned off. Different parts of the game are sectioned off. They are designed specifically for a given experience. Their underlying themes here, they're always the same. Okay, when you go to the merry-go-round, it will be the same ride. You may be riding on another pony, but it is a ride. Theme parks are very interesting and fresh the first time you do it. You may go into a dungeon with a certain map, kill the boss at the end. The first time you play it, it's fresh. Second, third time, and the more you play it, I think it loses its novelty. And so the theme park design requires the game studio to keep rolling out fresh content. They must have new dungeons, new raids, new bosses, and the like. Now, let's then quickly talk about sandbox. Sandbox is essentially what is a free form environment where you give the users usually a very big world, and you give them the tools to create experiences for themselves. So very easy illustration here for non-gamers. Let's say I put you in a world and I give you a set of Lego blocks, right? You can build whatever you want with it, and people build houses, villages, digital equivalents of what they have online in the game. Another example I can give is for sandbox games. Usually there's this new genre called the survival genre in games, where you are exposed to the elements in the game, and so basically you have to build shelter, you got to gather food, and you got to farm, and this whole experience is done individually by each player, and they get to interact as they do it. And so the experience for a sandbox game is one where it's largely random, it's very unpredictable, and whoever you meet online may be different from time to time. And so these two designs, theme park and sandbox, would be one of the first design-related questions. Now, the second design-related question to a game is, should it be an open world game, or should it be linear or sort of compartmentalized, right? So an open world game is where a huge seamless world is out there for you to explore. It is non-linear because different people go in different directions at once. They interact with different people. It tends to be chaotic, but the unpredictability always keeps it fresh. So many sandbox games are open world games. Now, the linear or more compartmentalized structure is one which is more scripted. That again, it's more theme park oriented, and it gives the end user a pre-constructed way to level and to progress. And so when you finish this with the script or with the story, or you finish a particular map, you move on to another. So that's the second question. Now, specific to metaverses, I think we also have the architectural question, which I loosely refer to a question of whether it is centrally built or it's decentralized. So, of course, there are quite a few companies today building metaverses and announcing that they are doing so. And these are very big tech companies, and they are implementing a centralized rollout of the metaverse. Now, we also live in a world today where we have crowdsourcing, open source software, where communities come together to build and they weave bits and pieces together. Now, if an operating system can be open source and assembled piecemeal, then so too, in my view, that there will eventually be a decentralized metaverse coming soon. Now, I move on to the next big question. In the game design, this is what I call the hook. What is the hook, or what is the motivational? What is the motivational impetus to play the game? Now, this is where game design has to provide for progression. And progression can be progression inside the game or outside the game. Within the game, you progress in the form of the story. You advance in the story. Your character build. Your character gets more powerful. There are cosmetics and skins to acquire over time. It gives you bragging rights. So progression within the story gives you the impetus and the motivation and the hook to continue playing. Then there's progression outside the story, and this is where a lot of the esports platforms they emphasize progression in skill, because in esports you play on a level playing field. Everybody starts the same in every game, and therefore the drive to play is to improve your skill, your twitch factor, your ability to move nimbly and quickly with the particular character. So progression can also be outside the game. And of course, nowadays you see entire industries of streaming and live streamers where they play their games. They're exhibiting their own prowess. So there's the development of these online personas and the avatars that represent them, and you see more and more celebrity gamers take the stage in streaming platforms. So that motivational design build is catered to this kind of audience as well. Now, another related question to design, and still on the topic of the hook. And by the way, yes, we are talking about spiritual opium later. So this hook, the question here is got to do with the effort and the reward, right? It's a very delicate balance. The effort has to be commensurate with the reward. You want to play the game and get rewarded with progression or in-game items, but it cannot be too easy. It cannot be too difficult. And as long as the entertainment factor is there, the hook is there, then game design says that you should build in an infinite loop so that the player can keep grinding and it's the journey, not the destination. Well, that is entertainment in that sense. Now, quickly moving forward, a few more topics on game design. Now, platform. Okay, as you know, we have today the mobile, the PC, and the console platform. The mobile being the most prevalent. PC and console penetration varies across geographies, but generally we have these three main platforms that are mass market. The AR and VR headsets that are coming. I think in recent years they've overcome the standards issue. They had this issue of commonality and having different standards in the past, but now I think it's laid to rest. It's more settled. It's just that the game rollouts have not really taken the industry by storm, but we can see that AR and VR headsets moving forward in future with the immersion potential that it brings will lead to this corresponding question of whether the metaverse will be supported by an AR and VR platform. And finally, I think we cannot discount what is coming. Another thing that is coming is 5G, not just for the mobile phone as it is today, but 5G with low latency, ultra low latency, is in theory at least supposed to support household devices of all types, and we will have a very connected living room in future where you have Internet of Things. And the Internet of Things means that basically you may not need to serve or make orders on your mobile phone anymore. It could be on the fridge. It could be an ordering panel on your dining table, for instance. Everything is connected, right? So this idea of everything being connected with very low latency, it feeds into this idea of a gigantic metaverse where everything is connected and everyone is together. So finally, I think I'll deal with the last two very quickly because we'll touch upon them later. There is a social question. Social question meaning all games today that are online and massively multiplayer, they require communities. And to set up these communities is a huge effort, quite apart from building the game. So you have a lot of these API integrations today where the games are integrated with streaming platforms so that they are seamless, right? So New World by Amazon launching in about a week's time is one such example. You know, it's seamlessly integrated with Twitch to facilitate live streaming. So social communities are also important, and they have to be built in. Now, I think the last question I'll deal with that is the economy question, and that you want people to build and hoard and keep playing, then you need an in-game economy, and the in-game economy requires you to design two aspects. First is the ability to trade. You know, to have trading windows pop up and be able to, you know, exchange, barter items that you acquire in game with your fellow players. The other aspect of design that I'll speak about later for the economy is currency. So in-game currencies and how they interact with fiat-based currencies outside the game. So I'll just stop here. I will very quickly run through the questions that apply to game design, right? Without actually naming the specific games, but I hope this gives you a flavor of what is a very connected metaverse that we are seeing appear. It's not just a bigger online game. It's going to be something different. So I hope those questions are a good start. Over to you, Adrian.
Thanks, Wing. I mean, I think for the audience, I think that was a huge a lot of information. I hope you guys understand now how big this topic was on paper for us. I wanted to kind of respond a little bit to what Wang said about game design and stuff. And I mean, it is true that you mentioned spiritual opium, and we'll come back to that. But I think part of the design is also to get people to go back in and play games. And, you know, you can call it a compulsion loop, or you can call it addiction. Or some of you in the chat are talking about loot boxes and stuff. But I got to tell you guys, no, we're not really going to get into that part of the gaming world. What I do want to kind of pick up from what Wayne said was things like ownership, things like commerce and sort of value. And we're going to take kind of some of that into the legal questions that might come up later. But first, let me come back to another panelist and ask Haksu. Now that Wang's kind of set the scene for the gaming world, Can you tell us a little bit about what you understand by the metaverse?
Yeah, thank you. Everybody seems to be talking about the metaverse these days, and any conversation perhaps cannot go on for a couple more than a couple of minutes without mentioning the metaverse. Um, and people are trying to find the definition of the term metaverse, and well, unfortunately or fortunately, it's very difficult for now to find a definite answer to that question. For now, it's sort of an amalgamation of different things, and depending on where you're coming from, a metaverse could look different. Say, if you're coming from the game world, you will see one set of the metaverse world, and if you're coming from the social network, the metaverse would look quite different, possibly. Well, as a general matter, typically you create an avatar, and you go to a sort of internet community, and within the community, uh, avatars interact with each other, and these avatars may know each other, or these avatars could complete strangers. And also, in terms of the technology, there could be many different technologies could be used, voice or vision, and many other things. And in terms of the equipment, you may need separate special equipment, or maybe not. Most well-known today, the kind of equipment would be Facebook Oculus Quest 2, something that looks similar to what Eugene is wearing. And for some other types of metaverse, you just don't need special equipment. You just need to have access to the internet. So there could be AR, augmented reality. There could be VR, virtual reality. There could be something called XR, which stands for mixed reality. And then there's something which doesn't require any separate equipment. And in terms of the services, could have some flavors of game, some flavor of social network, some flavor of shopping, e-commerce, RPA, business productivity, or meeting, convention, you name it. And there could be all different permutations and different flavors. And today I mentioned Facebook. Facebook has something called Horizon. Microsoft has something called HoloLens. They envision using AR. And other game companies, for example, Fortnite, Epic Games, they are coming from the game world, and Roblox, it's also another well-known game company. And something called Geppetto, it's coming from social network, and there you build community, you go shopping and hang out and interact with each other. So they're all different kind of vision and permutations. So we'll have to see. And one big watch point would be whether or how they could different platforms can talk to each other, or whether the platforms can be interoperable, and whether some sort of standards can be built.
So somebody mentioned in the chat that the metaverse is vaporware. Aksu, how do you respond to that? It's just not
Metaverse
happening.
is
Vaporware. It's not happening. It's not real.
oh we'll have to see. I mean, it's real. I mean, I myself is using sometime occasionally Facebook Oculus Quest 2, and I visited the world of Geppetto, and I have a friend of mine who occasionally hang around and try to have conversation with strangers. So we'll have to see what will happen next year or two from now, and whether it will become much bigger, or whether it just stays for a few minutes and perhaps disappear. I mean, who knows? But for now, there are communities out there in cyber space.
Right. Okay, well, for those of you who've played any sort of game or MMO or whatever, whether it's Second Life, which has been around since 2003, or whether it's something more current, um, I mean, social connectivity or a community is a big part of why people play games, right? I mean, sometimes it's skill, sometimes it's addiction, sometimes it's nothing else to do. But sometimes it's also to go and meet people and kind of hang out, right? That's where you have all these guilds in World of Warcraft before and so on. Um, okay, I want to kind of go to Eugene now and ask him, kind of having heard this, and it's a huge landscape. What are some of the sort of major legal issues that you would think would be relevant kind of from the gaming world into the metaverse? Maybe give me two or three.
Sure. Yeah, I think there are. I like to think that working in and around the interactive entertainment space is pretty fulfilling for a lawyer, especially interested in technology, because you really do get this really compelling intersection of a lot of different issues. Almost every issue that I can think of, legally speaking. Just very quickly, I think having heard both of my colleague panelists discuss all of the different types of game designs and also the kind of environment of the metaverse, you can pick up that there are issues of IP, of course, issues of commerce, privacy, security, safety, of course, and content moderation. Anytime you have products that you're selling, there's also obviously marketing issues and products liability, perhaps. But I think the ones that it's worth focusing on, I think, as we start to examine games and moving into a metaverse type space, is first of all stemming from some of the commercial interactions that Wang was mentioning. You can dive into the idea of ownership just as a concept. People will have possessions in the metaverse, and the question is, as between the different stakeholders, the host, different parties participating in the metaverse, any kind of adjacent services or products, who owns the possessions of that avatar, and how do you broker sales or trades? And as well, you can talk about just generally the concept of commerce in that space, how it relates to real life value and items or currency that may exist in the real world. And I think we'd be remiss if we didn't also dive into the question of anonymity and privacy, and specifically the balance that one must strike between the need for serving the interests of the user in having a fun, engaging, transformative experience. That's why they are heading to a metaverse, I think, in many cases, versus addressing accountability and ensuring safety for all users. So I think that one is worth talking about as well.
Okay. Haksu, just on for you, anything legal, kind of what's the top issue you would think in from the legal, from the metaverse?
Well, generally speaking, many of the legal issues that we have encountered, or the issues that are familiar with already, many of them will arise again in the metaverse, perhaps, well, obviously with some twist. So in game, some of the existing issues related to RPG game or some other types of games will arise again. Or in terms of social interaction, for instance, hate speech, defamation, or sexual harassment, that sort of issues will arise again in some different forms. And one thing in terms of the legal or in terms of regulatory perspective, one thing perhaps difficult could be that the boundary between a particular type of metaverse, or whether a service is metaverse, a platform is metaverse or not, that sort of the boundary could become murkier, and what kind of regulations should be applicable itself could be debatable. So if a service is considered game in many countries, there are very strict set of rules applicable to games. If platform is considered social network, there are different set of rules applicable. But if a metaverse provides some sort of gaming service and some sort of social network service at the same time, what set of rules are applicable, that itself could be debatable in the future.
I have this feeling there'll be at least two sets of highly paid lawyers arguing both positions will apply. Okay. I'm gonna pick one of the pick up on something one of you said about spending time in sort of the metaverse and property, right? And maybe ask a question. Eugene, kind of with the experience you have with gaming users now, and kind of looking forward to the metaverse, do you think the property ownership regime, or what they consider to be what they own, right? And it's not necessarily that is property or isn't. It's what they think they own, right? Do you think that would be different between gaming and the metaverse?
I think it's definitely an issue that we will see come up early, because in terms of the relationship between game users and game publishers, and then also those who provide, again, services that are in and around games, some of these questions have been settled not by a change in the legal regime, but by a sort of a mutually beneficial relationship in some ways. I'll give one interesting example, which is there's a game called Mafia. I think there's a subtitle to that, but it has maybe even more words than the subtitle of our panel, so it's hard to recall. It came out in 2006, so 15 years ago now. And when it came out with its 2006 level graphics, which were astounding at the time, and its level of fidelity, which was, I guess, inspiring, an individual named Robin Bongartz, who's in, I think, the Netherlands, was inspired enough to want to create a fully realized model of the Titanic, which it's sort of, the game takes place at the time that the Titanic would have been a kind of a going concern during that small window. So he decided that he would create the most high fidelity recreation of the Titanic ever conceived in games, and he began working on it then. It seems like he didn't really know anything about game development or design, and he just created it as a mod, which, just to explain really quickly, a mod, or short for modification, is, I think you could call it a derivative work in copyright terms, where you're taking a game engine or game assets that have been created, by a developer, and modifying it to, in some cases, like for example in World of Warcraft, very early mods existed to improve or enhance the interface in ways that made playing the game easier for players. Sometimes mods can be cheats that make it easier to play the game, but in some cases it's content, right? I want to have the Titanic in my game that takes place in, I think, New York City. So he set off doing this. He learned 3D modeling. He learned all sorts of lighting and physics systems. It's been 15 years. In the interim, the company that basically, in the interim, last year, I think, a remastered or remade version of the Mafia game has already come out. So in the eyes of the developer, there's already a new and better version, sort of. But he's still been chipping away, and finally this year he released this Titanic mod, and of course it represents thousands, I have to imagine, hours of work. It's a lot of fun for the players who are interacting with it, that he's distributing it to freely, of course, because he must, because of the kind of IP regime in place. But as this type of interaction will only be, or relationship, I should say, will only be more prevalent when we move to a metaverse where you're investing more and more time, and it's not just the odd, you could say, I think, fairly eccentric person who decides that, this is going to be my hobby. Some people watch Netflix. I'm going to learn how to, and then rebuild the Titanic inside of a game. And that means that there will probably be questions again of whether they want to do that work without any possibility of getting paid, unless it's with the express permission of the developer. And I should say, in some cases, it's not always the developer. The IP rights holder has allowed the creator of the mod to make money. So there's the example of Black Mesa, which is the name of a remade version of the game Half-Life, but using the source engine which Valve created for Half-Life 2. And I think early on in the process, Valve told the developer, "You're doing a great job. You're representing us well. You have our blessing." And the game is sold on the Valve-owned storefront Steam. And I think that the appropriate portion, whatever it is on Steam, of the proceeds are going to the developer, if I'm not mistaken. I know at least some portion is. So I think that this relationship will have to be re-examined. I think it will be prompted to be re-examined.
Well, first of all, I think creativity and effort in the gaming world is something that has always been seen, right? I just read last week that people were keeping a game alive that I helped shut down 7 years ago, and apparently they've been keeping it alive on their own server for the last couple of years, and I'm astounded that there are fans that do it, but they will. But I guess the question is, if the big bad
Is that
game
Ultima
company,
Online, Adrian?
No, it was well, that's a different story, but I helped shut that down too. But if it was Warhammer Online, which was we were going to launch it in China and then we shut it down. But I think the point was, people do these things. I think with the right tools and a platform, you can keep things going for a long time, right? Just like you can keep a 30-year-old car running. Fans will do it. But I think the question, legally is, what do they own, right? Eugene. So I think creativity and effort are one thing, but legally, is that a right that they have that they can enforce? A, against somebody who's copying them, right? Classic IP infringement. Or B, against the quote big bad IP owner platform quote, who's trying to say that you can't do this kind of stuff on our service. And maybe I'm not going to ask you that, Eugene. I'm going to ask Wayne what he thinks the rights and ownership position is for these kind of creations.
Thanks, Adrian. So we're looking at the from a legal perspective now, and I ask that you remember the architectural question I raised earlier in design. Now, legally, of course, there's copyright law, and everything all the rules associated with copyright. Now, essentially, depending on the architectural design of the game, insofar as a mod or something inside the game is an expression sufficient to be protected by copyright, then of course those rights can be asserted and litigated and enforced accordingly. But I would point out that based on the much that I've said earlier, it seems to me that in future rights that end users may wish to assert in their favor may not be based on copyright, because if I had spent 6 months grinding in an online game, and I've managed with great difficulty and effort achieved the very supposedly something very difficult in the game. I bought a fancy sword or a suit of armor, and that's just an example, but you get the point. If I buy or I acquire a digital good or digital item in the game through a mammoth difficulties, to what extent does the law recognize that as online property? So today there really isn't that kind of online property. Also, from a legal perspective, I have to mention the EULA, or end user license agreement, by the platform provider or the game provider. It's sometimes called the terms of service. It's the end user license agreement and the terms of service, as you know, always says the platform provider is God. Basically, they can change the rules anytime. They have absolute discretion. They can deal with items, in-game items, as their property. And some of them don't even say it's property, right? It's because the end user license agreement and the terms of service stipulate the contractual position between the game provider and the end user. Sometimes they mention, rights as between users inter se, but most of the time the game provider will say, I am the absolute judge to decide, with the discretion to decide any dispute. So in terms of enforcement of rights in the metaverse or in the game, I see it as a process with two layers. The first layer is having the dispute adjudicated within the game, which today is usually a technical support ticket, right? And maybe you have a game master coming in or someone from the game studio deciding who gets the item, right? Maybe there was a dispute over a trade window, and that's one level of dispute resolution. Of course, there is another level of dispute resolution which happens outside the game, and that's where you have to go to court, where you have to identify the party. There was pre-action discovery for that. Where there's also an emerging corpus of law relating to persons unknown, injunctions against persons unknown.
Players unknown.
Players unknown, yeah, players unknown, yes. So we're seeing, I think, different forums of adjudication. And of course, the one in the physical courts has always been there. I think the interesting part to look at is what happens in game, and increasingly will there be in a metaverse, will there be a virtual court room or a virtual police station to adjudicate on disputes between parties, without having to go to court, because it's not economical in most cases, right? Now, it's at this juncture I want to raise one development that is very that has great potential, and that is blockchain-based games. And we know that there's a whole wave coming, and there's significant development underway for gaming crypto tokens. Now, there's this new non-fungible token is an NFTs. Now, with the coming wave of blockchain-based games, it is possible to have in-game assets, in-game assets registered as NFTs. Now, again, there's a huge corpus of law and discussions now over whether crypto is property. Is it shows in action? Is it a thing in action? So I think this is a very exciting space, and it all, I think, is moving towards a time when there potentially might be recognition for online property. And I will leave it at that.
Right,
over to you,
thanks,
Adrian.
Wayne. Thanks, Wayne. And I think people in the audience have also been asking about things like NFTs and virtual rights. But so Haksu, let me just ask you one quick question. Like, in your experience with the metaverse, right, do you think that what Wang said about an online court or in metaverse dispute resolution is something that you would foresee? Would that work?
Well, as a general matter, there should be, I mean, whether you may call it a court or something else, but in any event, there should be some sort of dispute resolution mechanism. And for one, the platform operator would, typically have detailed information. So it's only natural that the platform operator would provide some sort of dispute resolution mechanism. And at the same time, say a user engages in a dispute with another user, and these two users are located in different countries or even different continents. And in that kind of cases, asking them to come to a single jurisdiction and have their dispute resolved, it oftentimes wouldn't be practicable. In particular, if the dispute is not really like life-threatening or doesn't involve so much of their fortune. So there could be, say, a hierarchy of dispute resolution mechanisms by which
Right.
a small-scale mundane dispute can be relatively easily resolved through an online, say, less formal mechanism, and the big shot, something with big stake, could be resolved more with more conventional mechanism.
I see.
And
Well, it's interesting. I mean, it's interesting because on the chat, I've got one comment that talks about sending things to the UN for dispute resolution. At the same time, I was going to say that ODR, online dispute resolution, is actually probably well suited for kind of in-game smaller disputes, like you say, where people are just kind of fighting over small things. And I think in some Asian countries, we're seeing that kind of is becoming more normal. And especially, as we're all kind of stuck with various states of lockdown, right? Online dispute resolution, going to your in-game resolution for your real life disputes actually might well be a possible way, right? Which actually brings me to the next question, the next area. We actually talked about economies earlier, Wei, and I have a question for, I guess, for you. So we're talking about rights. We're talking about different potential rights. We're talking about fighting over the rights and disputes and whatever, right? So I think the question then is, if you spend 100 hours building a world or a sword, or Eugene's friend spends 10 years of his life in his mom's basement, for example, right? What if you need to make a living from your virtual efforts? Like, how do people take the money or the time and the effort that they're putting into these creations and, buy things outside the world or keep going, in real life existence? How do you move value or stores of value from the real world to the metaverse?
I think that's a real, excellent question, and one of the key determinants of the future direction of the metaverse, I think. And Wang already mentioned, say, if you assume a single metaverse, the metaverse operator would dictate the terms that will be allowed in its own word. So EULA, he mentioned EULA and the user license agreement would dictate the terms of use for every user in a single metaverse. But I assume that in the coming couple of or several years, there will be millions of metaverse services or metaverse platforms trying to build their own world. And once we begin to assume there'll be multiple or plurality of metaverse platforms, then the question would become, what kind of interaction would they be allowed to engage in, between or among multitude of metaverse platforms. So if you own a piece of land or a piece of, say, a well-known brand bag that you bought or gained in a particular metaverse platform, can you bring it to another platform? That would be a question. So there will be, I assume, there will be some sort of alliance among a group of metaverse platforms, or within a large metaverse platform, there could well be a subset or a tenant metaverse platform. So there will be all sorts of alliances or dialogues or for interoperability, some sort of standardization, and depending on what group you belong to, some of the positions could be transferred to another metaverse platform, or then again, your position may not be allowed to transfer to a third group of metaverse platforms.
Right.
So there will be that sort of like different groupings among different platforms.
So this sounds a little bit like expanding your universe as you play Risk, and you kind of connect the countries and form alliances. I don't know, maybe that's not a video game thing, but actually, Wang, I think that's probably the point where I'm going to ask you. If we're going to talk about having a currency in game A and a currency in game B, I think you have gift cards for everyone, right? Talk about that for a minute.
Yeah. So I was since Adrian has raised it, here is an advertisement for Razer Gold gift cards. It exists in the form of physical cards. It's also available on gold.razer.com in the form of digital pins, and you can top up the wallet direct. Now, what is Razer Gold? Is essentially a form of virtual currency that is capable for conversion into in-game currency. So Razer is integrated with, I forgot the precise number, there's tens of thousands of different games. And as you know, every game has an in-game currency. And so this is that platform to have monies in. So I will now very quickly talk about the notion of the intersection, all right, between the in-game economy and the external economy. So I have to quickly set the stage first for in-game economies, so that you understand intersection. And of course, we won't talk about external economies, real-world economies, that is. So in an in-game economy, I think the main point I will explain here is in connection with what Hak-Soo mentioned. The platform has to support the notion of property. It has to be unique. It has to be precise. And so those basic hygiene aspects have to be in place. When you look at in-game economies and how they are designed today, they are not designed with property in mind. They are designed with monetization in mind. And they are designed to, depending on the model, if it's a subscription-based model, they are designed to make the players subscribe for as long as possible. For example, if the monetization model is to sell in-game items, say there's a game shop online inside the game, then it is geared towards that. And they also are so another example of how in-game economies are designed to foster not property but online gameplay. You notice there are always two types of currencies. First type of currency is the currency you can earn. Second type of currency is the currency you can buy. So the currency that you can earn is catered to people with lots of time. And currency you can buy cater to people with lots of money. So the in-game currencies that you can buy are largely how the developer gets their compensation for building the game. And this is where the Pareto rule applies. The 20% of the user base actually pays for pretty much everything, 80% of all the costs associated with operating the game. Now, coming back to earn and buy, of course, there's also the burn. In game design, there has to be a burn to consume all currencies that come into the system. And the burn is where the hook is. That's where you have things like loot boxes, which basically are like, to give a simple analogy, it's like, collector's cards. You have the packs where you open up the pack, you may not get the card you want. It's always random. Well, loot boxes are like that. So this RNG factor, what we call random number generator, and the element of chance makes the players have to come back again and again, and try again and again in order to get the item they want. So this kind of hook or game design is what keeps the user from playing. Now, that's where the intersection happens. Now I move on to intersection. Now, we see things that, for example, you have currency farmers in the game. In World of Warcraft was probably the one that started this, as I recall, and EVE Online as well. You have gamers who do nothing but farm in-game currency, and they sell it to other players. And payment can be made online through other means. Of course, this is against the terms of service and against most EULAs, but it does happen. So this kind of monetization through farming is one phenomenon we've seen. Another one has to do with the notion of tipping. So nowadays there's this construct of live streaming platforms. Big O is one of them, where you can purchase these digits, or it could be a digital flower or a digital token of some sort that you can give to the streamer to express your support, and then the streamer will get paid based on a scorecard of how many digits or how many flowers they received. So there's a payout on the other side based on a certain scorecard. So these mechanisms are monetization opportunities that lie at the intersection. Okay. Now, still at the intersection, there are legal issues here relating to a few aspects. The most common one being money laundering. So, in money laundering, to keep it very simple, you don't want a game to have a facility to cash out. Once fiat goes in as in-game currency, and whether it's called diamonds, rubies, emeralds, it should stay in. There must not be a facility to cash out or take the money out. So otherwise, under conventional money laundering rules, the money can go in a circle. So you want to prevent that circle by making sure that what goes in stays in. There's another piece of law that supports this idea of what goes in stays in, and that is the Remote Gambling Act. Currently being, I think the law of online gambling is being changed in Singapore, and a public consultation concluded very recently this year. Basically, the issues with gambling now are I think less concerned about skill, whether the game is skill based or chance based. I think it's more concerned about the transferability and the ability to cash out. Because if you cannot cash out your winnings, I guess it doesn't really matter whether the game looks like a gambling game, right? So this issue about money going out after it has gone in is also very a heated issue occurring at the intersection. Now, I believe that in connection with Haksu's point about property, I come back to my point that the system has to support online property. It cannot be designed with other things in mind. Yeah.
But okay, so Wang, I think we understand that there's property, you can generate it, you can transfer it, you can buy it and push it into the system. But I guess my question is, how do you take it out, right? So, if I need to make a living, pay my rent, pay my whatever, for expenses, buy pizza, one logical thing is I got to take it out and cash it out, right? Which is the anti-money laundering gambling problem that you mentioned. But what about this idea? And I ask, all of you this: what if it's possible to pay for the stuff inside the game? So inside the game, it's like that, that halwa, whatever they use. I send you an asset in the game, and in return, you buy the pizza and send it to my house, right? Is there a way to live off my virtual assets whether by transferring the money out to real world money, fiat currency, or by, whether it's by blockchain or by some other way, paying you inside the system to get you to supply me the goods in real life, but within the system. Haksu, maybe this is one, for you, and at this point, if you have an answer for that.
That's a very delicate and difficult question in the sense that, say, between or among a few metaverse or VR platforms, the private companies or private platforms can have some sort of agreement under which property can exchange under their umbrella. But the payment system, once it comes out of the metaverse platform and interact with physical world, that brings in a whole new set of uh, uh, issues out there. And the payment system itself, in practical terms, involves sovereignty or sovereign nations' economic system. So payment, when it comes to payment, individual countries' financial regulator has been very sensitive, and different countries have shown very different attitude. So in that respect, we'll have to see what kind of reactions we'll get from the financial regulators in different countries. And one more item that I would want to add here is AML, anti-money laundering, or other issues. When you interact with the physical world, you will need to reveal your identity. So in the cyber world or in the metaverse, you may conceal your identity or show just a bit of your identity. But when it comes to AML and other payment system, you typically have no choice but to reveal your identity. So that could complicate the story here.
Right. I just have to mention that a whole bunch of people want to live in their basements and order pizza, right? It's so inherently normal for us to know people like that. So anyway, I think we kind of want to pick up on something Haksu said, right, about how you have disclosed a little bit of your identity. And maybe that's the right point for us to move, because we're coming up at 2 o'clock and I have about a half an hour left with everybody. Should I have to use my real name, right? Personas and gamer tags and avatars are kind of the norm in the gaming world. You don't usually kind of run around as Eugene, whatever your middle name is, Mada. That's not how it's done, right? And but I think that's the question. Eugene, since I just mentioned you, how do you see this playing out on a privacy level?
Yeah, I think as I mentioned before about the legal issues that face lawyers working in any kind of interactive space, but particularly gaming for reasons that I'll mention in a moment, I think striking the right balance for their community between safety and anonymity is really important. And I want to emphasize that this is inherently going to be different for different communities. Some places, like I think certainly Facebook started out this way. I joined back when I had to verify that I went to not just a college, but a particular set of colleges to which or universities to which Facebook was exclusive back in the day. So that's a very real world identity focused platform. And others, like, for example, Second Life, I think is largely premised around the fact that it's not your life online. It is a second life that you can live and assume some other form or some other identity, different behaviors. And that inherently rests a bit on anonymity. My troll rogue in World of Warcraft doesn't behave the way that I would in the real world, but because I would never take loot from a corpse that I didn't actually kill. But the troll rogue does, because he's a little sneaky. So I think in cases like that, you want to facilitate the right level of anonymity. Now, as you ratchet that up, you start to allow people to indulge those behaviors. My corpse looting is, a fairly mild example, but as we all know, there are patterns of toxic behavior that can happen online, and to deal with that, you need to have some accountability. And I think that there is some desire from, I think Haksu can probably speak to this too, there's some desire from regulators around the world to create more accountability around different behaviors, some of the worst that we see exhibited online. But of course, the right solution looks different depending on whether depending on the types of expression that are sort of inherent to your service. Some places are about connecting with friends and family. Other places are about, being a space pirate in a pretend world. And also the expectation of the users and the policies of the platform. So, for example, if you have less accountability and because you have more anonymity, you may need to have a higher standard for community behavior than you would in a place where you're more focused on freedom of expression. But if it ever crosses the line, you know who to turn to and who to punish and expel from the service. So that's the way that I would that's the lens through which I would look at that question.
I guess. No, and I think that's fair. I mean, the point is, in some places you want anonymity, in other places your identity is important. I mean, it is like the real world. So this is the question, maybe Haksu, and the final question is
Can I add a little here,
yeah, sure,
Adrian?
yeah.
One thing that's also important to note is there is a distinction between your anonymity vis-a-vis others in the world and your anonymity vis-a-vis, we talked about ODR as an option, or just some kind of neutral arbitrator of behaviors. If you are accountable to one party with, by providing your identity to them, then you don't necessarily need to compromise your anonymity with respect to like the entire population of the the metaverse. So that's a way to maybe bridge a little bit of that gap.
Yeah, and I think, kind of on that note, it's more like you have expectations of privacy or anonymity in certain settings, right? And let's say, so you're going to run around as your identity online, but in other settings, you may have disclosed that to somebody to get something fixed, right? Like the government or the platform. And in other times, you might want to just be who you are, right? I mean, if you're there for marketing, for example, you would have to be who you are, right? Okay, I think that kind of maybe tells you that there'll be a dual persona kind of thing where we all want to go online as, whatever, rabbit ears guy or whatever, and we want to be who we are somewhere else. And we might have multiple personas, right? You might be able to play one game as somebody and one metaverse as somebody else, and never the twins should meet. So I'm gonna kind of break now with our kind of discussion. I want to kind of bring up a couple of things. So for the audience, right? I want to kind of quickly tell you how the poll ended, and then kind of we're going to move into Q&A with our last 22 minutes. All right. So I'm just going to read the questions and tell you kind of how people voted. Now that we've kind of gone through, we touched the surface of this topic, right? I told you guys this would happen. But so, do I want to plug into a metaverse? 53% said yes, 18% said no, 29% said no idea. Will I really own anything in the metaverse? 33% yes, 8% no, 58%. It depends. That is a classic lawyer answer, right? Should economic value, question 3, be fully transferable between the metaverse and real life? 43% said yes. That's a pretty a big number. 49% said it depends, 8% said no. I'm guessing they work in the anti-money laundering task force of various regulators. But seriously, right, to take that point on the chat, it is a real problem. I see many of you mentioning it, right? Like real currency, cash outs, addiction, I mean, gaming related problems. But I think you guys understand that the problem is if you spend more and more time online, that money, that value has to go somewhere, right? It has to be something that you can use. And maybe as St. Sue says, it's barter trade. Yes, that's what I kind of meant because you're effectively getting around it. But that also presupposes that you trust the person you're trading with, right? And it's not some guy who's going to come along and raid your dead body and take your boots and your sword. That's you, Eugene. Um, so last one, should I have to use my real name in the metaverse? 7% said yes. 58% of you no, right? And 35% again, it depends. So I mean, these are just kind of rough questions, but I think you can see that people do kind of, for example, have a sense that they want to be anonymous online, but they don't mind having, they also want to have property. Okay. Um, on the questions, I mentioned we would talk about spiritual opium. And I think where we wanted to go with that was, I don't know how many of you watched the show Ready Player One. It was Spielberg's movie, where kind of people jacked in and played anonymously in a virtual world, right? And at the end of it, I mean, it's not a spoiler. The guy won, and then he took over the ownership of this thing, and he said it'll be closed 2 days a week, so people have to kind of turn it off and get out and have a real life, like how children should be getting off their computers and their phones and getting out to the park, right? That's what the Chinese government's trying to encourage. So some of you have asked about this and about the limits and whether we think. So the question for the audience, right? We've seen it coming up in gaming. Do you guys think that government should have limits on how long people can spend in the metaverse? Should you be able to live your entire life with a plug coming out of the back of your head, almost like that's another movie, right? What do you guys think? Haksu, what do you think?
Perhaps no one knows for sure. I mean, one thing interesting to me was, as Adrian just mentioned, China was it last month or a few weeks ago, announced that Chinese users, young children, they wouldn't be allowed to play too many hours. Very restrictive approach. Around the same time, the Korean government made an announcement basically saying that they will give up restricting the hours that children can play games, and didn't make explicit, but it was perceived in the market that the government now acknowledged that restricting the number of hours that children can play wouldn't really achieve the stated goal of preventing them from spending too many hours and possibly getting addicted to playing games. So in the business world, getting rid of that sort of restriction itself wouldn't have too much of business impact, but at the same time, it would show the message to the world that game is not something to be addicted or something that can easily be handled by just controlling the number of hours. So it is just very delicate and multifaceted area. I mean, using the game, you can cure a patient at the same time, or some people see it just polar opposite, and playing the game will make you an addict, and obviously will try to get something good out of playing games or doing whatever in the metaverse. So as in the many things in the world, there are good aspects and bad, and the or how to, or what we can do to get something good out of it. That's what we'll have to do.
Right. Wang, what do you think?
I think I think the enforcement is going to be difficult, not because of the current state of play, but because I think game design evolves over time, and it's going to be like a cat and mouse thing. So currently, if this whole declaration by the Chinese government is centered around online gaming, we see that it is the ban and the restrictions applied to online gaming, then will we see game designers designing around it? That is to say, have a game that is predominantly played offline, and then you log in and go online just to sync up with the server all the progress that you have accrued separately offline. I mean, I can imagine there are ways to design a game around the rules. The second thing that I believe is that this whole thing about parental controls and the technology underlying parental controls, I think there's tremendous room for growth as a industry in itself. Where a parent can pay for a subscription and share that subscription with his children and be able to configure permissions that are age appropriate. I think there is, on the technology front, a lot of promise for parental controls. And I think essentially that's it from me on this point about spiritual opium.
So on the kind of setting parental controls, I mean, the reality is there are these controls already, right? Not all parents know how to do it. Not all kids are unable to disable them, right? The kid sleeping and use mother sleeping, kid unlocks phone with finger or face type thing. Or my kid taking my credit card out of my wallet and buying stuff. I'm not kidding. So I think those are the children, and that's kind of the spiritual opiate thing. But Eugene, I'm going to ask you a different question. What do you think we should do with adults? Should we control adults using the metaverse? Which was kind of the Ready Player One model, right? Everybody couldn't play.
I only read the book, and it was a long time ago. So what was the arrangement in Ready Player One? Why could adults not play? Like, why were they restricted?
I think he was referring to generally, as in overindulging in an online world beyond moderation.
Yeah.
Well, personally, I try to limit myself to a reasonable amount of work per day and at least a half hour of video games if I can. So I think for adults, maybe the restrictions and incentives work a little bit differently. I think, of course, there are video games that have addictive properties, and in fact, some are specifically designed to indulge those properties. I have to say, from my little corner of the world, I actually see a lot of positivity from these interactions. I was what some people might call like an indoor type of kid growing up. I had friends, but I liked to kind of do things on my own sometimes, and I moved around a lot, and it was sort of difficult to find community. And so something like Twitch, even before I worked there, really spoke to me because of the ability to form connections around common interests that transcend your current physical location. And, again, in Singapore, we have malls still. I don't think that they really exist in the US anymore. But at the time when I was growing up, that was sort of the cool thing to do. And nowadays, instead of going to the mall, you can hop online and chat with your friends and talk through your day while you're sort of gathered around a game in a kind of eternal way where, before screens, we gathered around a campfire to kind of talk through how things happen and, roast a marshmallow or something. So I think people's personalities can guide them toward or away from various destructive behaviors. And we have game developers have responsibilities. Certainly, governments have responsibilities to look for trends and make sure that things move in the right direction. And there's a case of personal responsibility as well, where people have to know when they're witnessing something destructive in their lives and I pull themselves away or get help from their community to find a more healthy alternative, I guess.
Oh, thank you, Eugene. I mean, I think that is an excellent answer. I'm gonna presume that not everybody can do that, right? And the governments may have to step in. But let me ask you guys this question, and it's a quick one before we need to end in 10 minutes, right? Do you think there'll be a metaverse that will not be able to be regulated by the governments? Because, somebody in the chat said they're going to have a patchwork and all maybe the big tech companies will cooperate, maybe they won't. Maybe the metaverse platforms will be able to architecturally connect and maybe they won't. But it seems that there might be a way for you to set up a metaverse that cannot be regulated. In Singapore, it's a sovereign nation kind of idea, right? As some of you might recall. Do you think it'll be possible to have a dark web metaverse, whatever, that people will be able to go in there and do anything they want?
Yes, very much so. I believe that there probably will be more than one metaverse. I think the real question is which one takes on critical mass and becomes the predominant platform. I believe that there are platforms where the standard procedure is that everyone is anonymous, and then I believe that there will be other platforms which require verification, age gating, age verification, and lots of controls. But I do firmly believe that the new platforms requiring these checks and balances and controls are because they will have features that promote online property, promote economy, and healthy good things that require identity to be established. Even trade, for instance. So I believe there will be different boats for different folks. And yes, yeah. So we will see what may.
Okay, Haksu, anything from you as a final thought on that?
Yeah, I mean, say there's a metaphor with dump pipe, which was mentioned when we were talking about this in preparation, and as a platform becomes bigger and there are more and more users, any platform cannot stay passive, and there will be growing pressure to be more proactive. So, for instance, in a social network, platforms typically are requested or required to do some sort of moderation work, and in the metaverse world, same thing could happen. I mean, at initial stage, they could be left on their own, but once it becomes bigger and has more of a social impact, then there will be greater pressure or demand from the society to be proactive and do some sort of moderation or control or that sort of monitoring work, and that we'll have to see how things evolve.
All right. I think it's kind of what we're seeing with the social media companies now, or big tech, right? It's sort of a pullback from letting them do whatever they want and regulate some of that. Okay, Eugene, I'm going to ask you if you have any final thoughts on anything else today. I'll give you a wildcard answer, and then I'm going to kind of close up.
Oh, you don't want to do that. I think it's as you move into any kind of new technological frontier, I think it's very important to connect with kind of cross-functional colleagues around the industry and make sure that there is a strategy. And I don't mean for a strategy to keep whatever it is that you're doing legal, but also a strategy to align on user expectations and how to make sure that we are moving in the right and sensible direction. So I think opportunities like this and Tech Law Fests are a really essential way of doing that.
Thank you. So I think on that note, I guess for everybody's benefit, I kind of feel like we are living through a bit of a metaverse now. Everybody's on the screen, everybody's all over the place. None of us have met. Well, we've met virtually a couple of times, all the audience. I have no idea who you guys are looking out into a screen as opposed to in the past where we would have a room, right? In a sense, 2020, 2021 are living kind of the precursors to living in a metaverse or a game world. That's why people are playing so much games nowadays, right? It's a way to connect, a way to interact, a way to entertain yourself, or have escape from the reality, which you may want to do. But I think it's an interesting topic. It's been quite a ride getting through all this. So I want to thank the audience for your patience and also the questions and comments to help us kind of, even though it's over a screen, to try and react to it as it goes. I want to thank the panelists, all of you guys. Thank you very much for the time and kind of really engaging along the way to get here. And for Tech Law Fest for inviting me to be a moderator and have the panels. And also I want to thank the tech crew. I guess they probably don't get a lot of love back at the room somewhere, but thanks you guys for keeping this moving smoothly. And of course for the CLE and SAL stuff, there's a thing running now. You'll need to do that later if you want your points. For the audience, if any of you guys want to connect, I think all the panel on LinkedIn or whatever, you can reach out and ask us questions. We can't get to every single one of your questions, but we'll have a look at it and share it and look forward to some questions offline. Thank you very much, everybody, and have a great day, rest of the Technofest. Bye.